Ever feel like you're talking and talking but getting nowhere? Like you're hitting a brick wall. Ugh, it's the worst. And you know it's like conflict, right? Conflict is just the worst. You can't get away from it. But hey, what if I told you there's a way to actually get better at it? To make
Uh,
conflict, dare I say it, maybe even a little less painful. Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're talking all about conflict resolution with this awesome book. How to Speak Up During Conflict is Easy, actually. And you know what I love about this book? It doesn't tell you to avoid conflict altogether. It actually gives you the tools to work through it. Like it really emphasizes effective communication as the key, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you don't nail that communication part, things can go downhill so fast.
Yeah, it's true. And the book really digs into this thing about like how stress can totally mess with our brains.
Oh, tell me about it.
Like literally hijack our brains, you know? Makes it harder to think straight, harder to really listen to the other person.
And forget about empathy. Right.
Exactly. It's like our nervous system is screaming fight or flight. It's no wonder we end up saying things we regret.
Okay, so that's why I turn into a mumbling mess whenever things get a little heated. Makes sense.
Exactly. And that's where the book's tools come in, like using I statements.
Oh yeah, I statements. I've heard of those.
It's subtle, but it can completely change the tone of a conversation.
Okay, so give me an example.
Let's say instead of saying, ugh, you never do the dishes, which, let's be honest, just puts the other person on the defensive.
Yeah, no one likes to hear that.
Right. You could say something like, I feel overwhelmed when the dishes pile up because it makes me feel like I'm the only one who cares about a clean kitchen.
Ooh, I see the difference. It's like one is an attack and the other is you expressing your own feelings.
Exactly. It's about inviting the other person to understand where you're coming from, not putting them on trial.
Wow, so simple but so powerful.
And you know, it's interesting. This ties in really well with another concept the book talks about, active listening.
Oh, active listening. Well, it's harder than it sounds, right?
It really is, especially in the heat of the moment. It's so easy to get caught up in your own head thinking about what you're going to say next.
Oh my gosh, yes, I am so guilty of that.
But active listening is about truly tuning in to what the other person is saying, like really hearing them. So that means putting your phone down, making eye contact, actually being present in that moment.
And not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Exactly. And, sometimes it even means asking clarifying questions like, so what you're saying is, and then reflecting back what you've heard to make sure you've got it right.
It's like you're hitting the reset button, you know, before things go totally off the rails. But it's like all this stuff about active listening and I statements, it sounds amazing and I get it, I do. But it's different when you're actually in it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Like especially at work when things get tense and the stakes are high and you feel that pressure. It's tough to remember all this stuff.
It is tough. And, the book, it actually spends a good chunk of time talking about workplace conflict, which I appreciated.
Okay.
And one thing it points out is that a lot of times those conflicts, they come from things like, miscommunication, maybe clashing personalities, different priorities.
Right.
Not necessarily because anyone is like out to get each
Oh,
other.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like that saying, I love that saying. It's like, don't attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence.
Yes.
Or in this case, maybe just a little miscommunication.
Totally. And when it comes to actually like de-escalating those situations at work, the book, it really emphasizes staying calm, using neutral language.
Way easier said than done, though.
Oh, for sure. For sure. But like, instead of saying, and I've definitely been guilty of this, but like, instead of saying, you totally messed this up,
Yeah, no.
which just makes things worse.
Puts them on the defensive, yeah.
Exactly. You could say something like, hey, I noticed a few things in this report that we should probably go over together.
Oh, so much better. But again, like, my heart is racing at this point, you know?
Right. And the book gets that. It acknowledges that, like, our biology isn't always helpful in these situations.
For sure.
But it does give some really good advice for speaking up confidently, even when you feel that, like, nervous energy.
Okay, good.
One thing is it talks about the power of preparation. Like, before you go into a potentially difficult conversation, think about what you want to say.
Oh, that's good advice. Like, almost have a little script ready.
Yeah,
So you're not just, like, in the heat of the moment trying to find the words.
totally. And it also talks about this idea of, like, there's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive.
Oh, yeah, big time.
And there's a fine line there, but it's so important.
Totally.
Assertive is about, like, advocating for yourself and your needs while still being respectful of the other person. Aggressive is more about, like, attacking or trying to overpower the other person.
Yeah, I like that.
And then the last thing it emphasizes in terms of kind of the communication tips is staying focused on the issue at hand.
Oh, good one.
So you're not, bringing up past
Right,
grievances.
not letting it spiral.
Exactly. It's like, what are we actually trying to solve here?
Okay, this is all great for work, but I feel like, I don't know, this is all even harder when we're talking about our personal relationships.
Right.
Like with family, with our partners. It feels so much more loaded.
It does. The stakes feel higher.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The book actually argues that, like, if you can learn to handle conflict well in those close relationships, it can actually make them stronger.
Oh, interesting.
It's like a muscle.
Okay.
The more you practice healthy conflict resolution, the better you get at it and the more resilient your relationships become.
So it's not about avoiding arguments or disagreements altogether. It's about, like you said, learning how to navigate them in a healthy way.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that really stuck with me from the book is this idea of, like, how important it is to avoid misunderstandings in the first place, like, especially with people we're close to. It's so easy to make assumptions, jump to conclusions, and that just leads to unnecessary conflict.
Oh, tell me about it. I am the queen of making assumptions, especially in my relationship. It's like I will create a problem out of thin air.
It happens to the best of us. But the book, it gives this great example, this contrast between assuming and clarifying.
Okay.
So let's say your partner is being kind of quiet one night. Like, you can go down that rabbit hole of assuming they're mad at you, assuming the worst.
Oh, yeah.
Or you could just say, hey, you seem a little quiet tonight. Is everything okay?
Oh, my gosh, yes. Such a simple question.
Right. But it can make a world of difference.
It's like choosing curiosity over, like, catastrophe.
Exactly. And then when you do have those tougher conversations, whether it's with family or a partner, the book, it emphasizes a few key things, like staying calm, setting boundaries, and then sometimes being willing to just agree to disagree.
So it's about picking your battles, right?
Yes, it's recognizing that not every disagreement needs a winner and a loser. Sometimes the healthiest thing is just to acknowledge that you have different viewpoints and move on with, like, mutual respect.
Yes. Like opting out of the drama.
Ah, I love that.
Okay, so we've talked about, like, those personal relationships, but what about when you're in a leadership role? Like,
Yeah.
that adds a whole other layer, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because now you're responsible for, like, other people and their conflicts, not just your own. Does the book talk about that at all?
It does, yeah. There's a whole section in there about managing conflict as a leader. And it really zeroes in on emotional intelligence as being super important for leaders, especially when it comes to conflict.
So it's not just about, like, managing your own emotions, but also, like, reading the room,
Right.
picking up on what your team might be feeling, even if they're not saying it out loud.
Yeah, exactly. Like creating a space where they feel safe to actually speak up. And, there's this great story in the book about a manager who turned a whole team dynamic around just by acknowledging everyone's feelings.
Okay, how do you do that?
Well, he got really good at noticing when people seemed off, like maybe withdrawn or frustrated.
Yeah.
And instead of ignoring it, he gently encouraged them to talk about what was going on. And that made a huge difference.
Wow, it's like it changes the whole vibe of the team, right?
Exactly. Instead of feeling like it's us versus them, it's more like, hey, we're all in this together.
Totally.
And the book really stresses that, creating that psychological safety where everyone feels heard and respected, even when there are disagreements.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, and it also talks about how important it is to address conflicts early on. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like before they snowball into these huge things,
Yeah.
way easier to put out a small fire.
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
But I imagine that's tough for a leader sometimes, to step in early, especially if they're feeling the pressure themselves.
It is, and that's why another key takeaway from the book is about the importance of the leader remaining neutral.
Oh, that's so hard, though.
It is, because if the leader takes sides or gets caught up in the emotions of it all,
Yeah, breaks down the trust.
exactly, it can undermine that whole feeling of safety we were just talking about. And the book actually gives some really good practical advice for staying neutral.
Okay, like what?
Well, things like asking open-ended questions,
Okay.
summarizing different perspectives to make sure everyone feels heard.
All right. And then ultimately really focusing on finding a solution that works for the whole team, not just one person.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, one thing I've been thinking about throughout all of this is we don't always have to go head-to-head to work things out.
Right.
Sometimes it feels like less is more. you know?
Yeah, totally. And the book actually talks about that too.
Does it? Okay, good.
There's a whole section on non-confrontational approaches to conflict.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, like it talks about picking your battles, knowing when to just let something go, and when agreeing to disagree is actually the best way forward.
Oh, I love that. Like sometimes choosing peace is more important than proving your point, right?
Exactly. And it even suggests using humor to kind of like lighten the mood.
Okay, yeah, as long as it's appropriate.
Of course, it has to be done with sensitivity, but yeah, laughter can really like shift the energy of a situation.
Totally. So, wow, we covered so much. I feel like I need to go back and listen to this again, maybe take some notes. But if I'm being honest, the thing I struggle with the most is just like staying calm in the
Oh,
moment.
no, me too. It's like
Yeah.
your brain knows what to do, but your body's like,
Exactly. It's like my
yeah.
heart starts racing and I can't think straight.
Right. But the good news is the book gives you some practical tips for calming down. Like
Wow.
we've talked about the deep breaths, but also like physically stepping away from the situation for a minute
Yeah.
to give yourself some space. And then I love this one, but reminding yourself of the bigger picture. Like, is this thing you're upset about really that big of a deal?
Yeah, it puts things in perspective.
Right. Like, will this even matter in a week, in a month, in a year?
It's like hitting the pause button before you react.
Yes, exactly. And all of this, like all the things we've talked about today, it all ties back to finding that sweet spot of assertive communication, where you're expressing your needs and boundaries clearly,
Okay.
but you're doing it in a way that's respectful of the other person.
So it's like finding that balance between being a pushover
Mhm.
and being like a bulldozer.
Exactly. You got it.
Wow. Well, this deep dive has been amazing. I feel like if I had to sum it all up, it's that, conflict is just, it's part of life, right? We can't avoid it completely, but we do have a choice in how we respond.
I love that.
And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just take a deep breath and ask ourselves, is this a fight I need to have?
That's a great question.
Maybe the answer is yes, and hopefully we have some new tools now to navigate that. But maybe, just maybe, the answer is no, and that's powerful. So to everyone listening, what will you choose? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.